Hey guys, what do you call a factory that makes okay products?
I don't know. What do you call a factory that makes okay products?
I don't know. What do you?
A satisfactory. Hey, we never said this was a joke show.
Sometimes this show is a joke.
All right, let's get serious here. We have a few stories to go through. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Culminating with all the trouble that Apple got into last week. But let's start with Microsoft because, you know, there's just only a handful of multi-trillion-dollar companies in the world, and we should be poking fun at them.
I really like Microsoft overall, but I hate Teams.
I hate Teams with a passion.
I don't like a lot of aspects of it, and so it's got a problem now. What's the problem?
Well,
what is it? Oh, because you're a hacker. That's why you love Teams.
Yeah, Teams is a great way to deploy malware. So
wow.
And
let the lawsuits begin.
So this one's interesting. I know. Woo! No, actually, Teams has had several issues over the last couple of years where it's been used to house malware. So, you know, let's say I break into an organization. And I have a valid username and password for an Office 365 account or something along those lines. It's real easy for me to then share a file over Teams. That's hard for antivirus to scan. That's been done in the past. What's interesting is Teams typically will look for what's called an external tenant. Mm-hmm. So anybody from the outside, by default, who's not in your organization is considered an external tenant. And what'll happen is, if you get a file from an external tenant, there's all sorts of warnings around it. So you wouldn't click on it, right? Somebody just hits you up and says, hey, I'm from, I don't know, franklins.net. And, I see you haven't updated your computer recently. Here's a file. And it would say this is from an external tenant. And Carl would go, yeah, you know what? I'm not interested. I'm not going to click on it. What the bug is here is there's a group of UK researchers that found out if you intercept the post when you go to put the file up, you can change the IDs of the sending and receiving person and then click send.
Oh, wow.
And what it does is then Teams doesn't know it's from an external tenant. So you can swap that ID to say, no, this is from the inside. And then Teams will just put the file in there without ever saying this is from an outside tenant, right?
Of course you can, because why would we want to make that secure?
Right, exactly. Like they assume it's almost like Teams assumes nobody can actually see the magical requests that are happening over the web, and then stop them and modify them. So that's this bug.
Yeah.
Right. So the moral of this story is be careful. Obviously, be careful anything you get over Teams. Obviously, if you can stop using Teams, that's good too. But but the other thing I would say is Microsoft has dubbed this as a not important fix.
Really?
So they've said, listen, we'll get to it at some point, but it's not immediate. So this will be an interesting vector for a small period of time here until Microsoft decides to patch it somehow.
So when are we launching the training class, Hacking Teams?
ASAP, before the patch.
Right. I just don't like it because of the whole multi-tenant things. Like you don't know who you're logging in as or logging in with, and typically I don't have problems when I have, like, for example, I have multiple companies that are represented with Google emails and stuff, so I have a lot of email accounts, right? AppvyNext and Franklin's.net and PWOP and I have no problem, signing in as another account. But for some reason, Microsoft Teams just has, I don't know, I'm in there and I try it and I just can't get in. And so I end up calling in with a phone and saying, sorry, I can't get in. And I didn't just fall off a turnip truck. I know how to look around and figure things out.
I thought it was a potato truck.
Okay, whatever.
I know, right?
It just makes me feel really, really
You're
dumb.
not alone. You're not alone. It's stovepipe. Yeah. It's not. It doesn't allow you to jump from organization to organization the way something like Slack does.
Yeah.
I'm surprised Slack doesn't have these same issues. Maybe they're 0 days waiting to be discovered. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I don't know. So I think the critical thing here is that it hasn't been patched. This is
works as designed.
A low priority.
Yeah. Works as designed. Microsoft says they'll look at it at some point, but it's just not important enough to look at right now. So it'll be open for a little while.
While supplies last.
Mm-hmm. All right, what's next?
Send your malware.
China. We love China, but I don't.
Vanguard Panda.
I don't understand why I have a hot dog preparation video on this page. Maybe you guys are seeing something different.
I am seeing something different, yes.
I am totally seeing something different.
I thought the video, like right under the second paragraph here, was part of the story. And I'm looking, and somebody's making hot dogs with spaghetti and cucumbers coming out of it.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Listen, I don't know what you surf on the web. Mine is a video about security affairs.
Mine's an ad for Fiverr.
All right, so I was obviously watching Top Chef or something. All right, so what is the story?
This one is a warning around the way that certain APTs, which are advanced persistent threats, operate.
Okay.
So this particular advanced persistent threat, APT, Vanguard Panda, is very good at what they call living off the land, LOTL. Which living off the land means don't bring any of your own tools. Like when we're on an active operation breaking into an organization, one of the things we want to do as much as possible is use the tools that are already there because they're usually already whitelisted. There's no issues in running them and they're not going to throw any flags, right? So for example, sometimes it might be WMI, which is Windows Management Interface, which I may manage servers that way. And that's what an administrator would do. It might be PowerShell. And I would then use PowerShell because that would be pretty common for an administrator. But if I take like a Cobalt Strike beacon and put it on a server, well, that's, something that antivirus would see, Defender would see, you know, Sophos would see, whatever. So certain things you want to avoid when you're moving around a network. So the most stealthy APTs will use what already exists there.
Okay.
Fast forward. So why are we calling this particular APT out? A, they live off the land, very hard to find, so relatively stealthy. B, what they did is, if you guys remember, if you guys have been paying attention to security this week, we did talk to you about, I think it was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, about AD Self-Service Plus by Managed Engine. And it's a product that gives you the ability to, monitor and manage settings around Active Directory and that sort of stuff. Well, there was an exploit recently, Managed Engine AD Service Plus by Zoho.
Yeah.
That was it.
Right.
So we had talked about this. We had, said, go patch. And in the interim, what had happened is this particular APT, what they had done is they have exploited this with the already patched exploit. So you can patch it, right? And there's no issues there. But, if you haven't patched, what they did is they exploited it and then they created a new page and a new set of jars inside of that application that looks like it was written by the developer. It has links out to the actual help files. It has helpful information on it. Like you wouldn't be able to tell that this page wasn't actually part of the production product. And lo and behold, it gives them access and command and control over the entire product. So very, very stealthy way to infiltrate an organization and look like this is just the standard part of the product. So be careful there.
I mean, that speaks to something, which is we've come to be trained that, the hackers are going to have horrible spelling and they're going to make these mistakes and the font's going to be wrong. And we're entering the age where that's no longer the case, where you have to question your senses. It's the deep fake of text. Is that they're not going to have outrageous stories and they're not going to have misspellings and they're not going to have graphics that don't work. There's still some of that out there, but you can't count on that to protect you. You have to have common sense training. And so that means that training is starting to become more and more important because, phishing training is starting to become in vogue, but just general security training. Maybe you should listen to a podcast.
Yeah. It's not a bad idea. Guys, I want to introduce to you my new YouTube vlogging show called The AI Bot Show.
Wow. Very cool.
Ooh. Da.
So I have a friend, Brian McKay, who jumped into GPT. First of all, he's a brilliant developer. and just a very smart guy, multi-talented in very many aspects. But he jumped into GPT way before anybody heard of it, and he started messing around with it. So he understands the large language models, and he also understands the tools that you can use to do things. And basically, he and I go through it's mostly he and I talking, and then we pull up ChatGPT and mess with it.
Oh, wow.
Well,
cool. That's
in the
always
first
fun.
one anyway, but in the second one that we just published, we get into prompt engineering, and we use the playground to actually develop a story. And we have a synopsis. We ask for an ending. We ask for several characters. We tell them the things that we want these characters to be. We want them to be multicultural. So that it comes up with all these great characters.
Does the AI crush the human rebellion in the end?
No. Anyway, it's a fan. I'm learning so much just watching this, but it's not just for developers. It's not for people interested in security. It's not about conspiracy theories taking over the world. It's about learning how to harness this tool to use it for yourself, to be more productive and to get some more ideas. So the AIBotShow.com.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right, what's next?
I think next is probably The Mockingjay.
Good movie. No, talk about something else.
I think. Wait a second. I think this is awesome.
This is
actually.
bad. Then
This is
very bad.
Let me. Hold on.
Head for the fallout shelter. Train like something.
Right. Exactly. For those of you who are into process injection, let me back that up a little bit.
Both of you, please pay attention.
Yeah, really. Call the other guy.
So, right. Yeah. Get him on the line. So we're, when we as security researchers attempt to write a piece of malware or, command and control or something along those lines because we're testing out a customer's infrastructure. Or when a bad guy does it, obviously, when they're ransomwaring a company or something along those lines, antivirus is constantly looking at everything running on your system, right? Yeah. That makes sense, right? So it's constantly looking, is it bad? Is it bad? Is it bad? And there's a lot of neat processes out there that you can use, like doppelganging, herpaderping, process hollowing, thread
still makes me laugh.
Execution, hijack. Yeah. So there's all sorts of really cool things you can do to try and inject malicious code into a place that it shouldn't be and get it to run. Right. And also get AV not to see it. But AV's pretty smart. And AV's gotten savvy to a lot of these things. So a lot of times, if I want to inject a piece of malicious code, I need to take it and it needs to be like, needs to be base 64 and in hex. And then I need to take that hex and do some magic to it and then push it into memory in a certain way that it'll run. Well, when I do that, because I can't just leave it as an executable on disk, because AV sees it. I can't leave it as a DLL on disk. AV sees it. So there's all these sort of stealthy ways for me to inject it into memory. Yes, thank you. But to do that, I need to access some very low-level Windows APIs, right? I need to say, allocate this memory in your RAM, in the stack, so that I can then inject code into it and run it automatically. And those processes, those APIs, application programmer interfaces, those DLLs, system calls, if you will, those are very well monitored by antivirus. Antivirus is like, listen, if somebody's going to inject a process, they need to allocate memory. And they need to say that memory space is readable, writable, and executable. So we'll just look for that. And anything that tries to inject into a memory space that's readable, writable, and executable, well, we'll just stop it and inspect it and see what it is. What the Mockingjay process does, and in this particular one, they were able to exploit the MSYS-2.0 DLL. Okay.
Some Windows DLL, right?
Yeah, it's a Windows DLL that's actually used, if I remember correctly, it's with the Cygen Win.
It's just something that's there. And
it's part of the operating system.
Part of the operating system.
It's part of the operating system. It's a DLL that's been vetted, that's allowed, can be scanned by antivirus. There's no malicious
code like Norm at
Cheers. At
Everyone knows its name.
So what you're saying is you can't allocate new memory and you can't make that memory readable, writable, and executable, but maybe this is what they do. Do they look for a space in the DLL that's readable, writable, and executable and just overwrite the code?
Yeah. So Carl's
you're corrupted.
Carl's
you're
getting
officially
his
corrupted.
chops here.
I mean, that's what I would do.
You are. You're
if I was evil like Dwayne.
So what's neat, right?
Okay, so we're going to rename this podcast to Two Bad Guys and a Good Guy.
And the guy with the gun
who.
is the good guy.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
That's always me, trust me.
So you're absolutely right, Carl. What they do is they take this DLL that's completely benign. You write a custom application, right? Whatever it is, and you load the DLL. That's what you do with applications. You load DLLs, and this DLL is fine. But that DLL has a massive readable, writable, executable space. Just because that's how the developers, whoever wrote it back in the day, designed it. So now you can inject an entire shell in there, an entire malicious piece of code, and antivirus doesn't see it. So it's a very cool new process for putting code.
So you have all the parameters that you just ignore, and whatever you run runs self-contained, and it has to be the same size as the memory space that the existing method was taking up, right?
You can't make it easy.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be that easy.
Yeah. Well, no. What's insane about this DLL is the memory space that that you have available to you is 16K.
That's a lot, actually.
16 it's huge.
Yes.
It is like you could put almost a whole program in there. It's awesome. Like usually we're talking about how do we get a reverse shell or malicious code in like bytes, like 120 bytes. Can we do it? Not 16K. I mean, 16K shit, we could put like comments in there if we wanted to. Like, that's a lot of,
It was the best of code. It was the worst of code.
Well, I mean, we're talking assembly language code probably too. I mean, it's very,
There's no compilers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's massive. Yeah, exactly.
Ones and zeros.
So, interesting process. For those of you out there who are trying to bypass endpoint detection systems and antivirus, this is a really cool new tactic.
I would play the music, but I'm just too lazy. All right, we'll take a break. We'll be right back after these fun and informative messages. And we're back at Security This Week. I'm Carl Franklin. That's Patrick Hines and Dwayne LaFlotte. And by the way, if you don't want to hear those ads in the middle of the show or at the beginning and the end of the show, you can become a patron at patreon.com. I believe our Patreon link is on the website, securitysthisweek.com, and or it might even be patreon.securitysthisweek.com that redirects you there. And I think it's $5 a month and no ads for you. All right.
Woohoo!
Fortinet vulnerability exposes networks to code execution attacks. Fortinet sounds like a Quebecois beef dish.
It does. I don't know why, but it does. Yeah. So we talk about the CVSS score all the time, right? As a kind of a lipness test, if you will, of how bad the particular exploit is. This one's a 9.6 out of 10.
I thought it was 9.8.
It's 9 point anything.
Oh, no, there's several of them.
Yeah, there's several in there.
One of them is a 9.8.
Oh. All right, and
so you know, whatever, not so bad.
That's an arbitrary code
Fortinet has a Fortinet network access control solution, and they've already patched it, right? But it's a massive critical security vulnerability. So patch. But what does it do?
So this one's actually they're all kind of neat, but but this one, the crux of this one is a deserialization attack. And I think we've talked about these a little bit, but I definitely want to touch on this. And you know, Carl, being the developer, knows this very well. You know, all of the programming we do is object oriented. Right. So we have objects we pass around all over the place. It could be an object that represents a customer. Right. And it has
we're confusing people. I mean, we're really talking about data structures in memory. And you might have one called
Yes.
customer that has a first name and last name properties and an email address property. And serialization is the act of taking that object in memory and turning it into a text representation of itself so that it can be saved to disk or sent across the wire. And deserialization is exactly the opposite. You take that text and you turn it back into an object. Sometimes they call it dehydrating and rehydrating, right? But that's what it is. It's basically taking data structures, turning them into text or binary data, sending them across the wire, saving them to disk, whatever, bringing them back.
That's a great explanation.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you'll hear it by different names. In Python, it's called pickling and unpickling.
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
Whatever.
Hey, is that object pickled? I only
pickled.
like pickled objects, but I can't eat it.
Sometimes it's marshalling and unmarshalling.
I can't eat it until it's unpickled.
Deserialization and serial. I live a nice, fine pickled
wash it
object with my ham and Swiss. So what's interesting about this? Let's say Carl is an application server, and I'm a client, and Carl sends me an object. And he can't just send me an object, right? He has to serialize it. He has to put it in text so that it can make it down to me. And then I can deserialize that object. I can turn it from text back into the object it was. Well, there's very few mitigations between Carl and I. Let's say Patrick's in the middle listening in. It's just text, right? He could change the text. He would. So if he changes that text in a little bit, let's say Carl sends me a customer object that has the name of Dwayne and Patrick changes the name to Patrick. Okay, you could do that. And when I deserialize the object and I open it up and I see it's a customer and I look at the name, it's now Patrick. So that was a little bit malicious, but not a big deal.
There's one flaw in your theory, sir, and that is he would never change the name to his own if he was a hacker, would he?
If that is my real name.
Unless you knew that I knew that you would do that type of thing.
I built up a resistance to iocane powder.
Best movie ever. So, and for you kids who have no idea what we're talking about, check out The Princess
Ask
Bride.
your father.
Yeah, exactly. So what's interesting is the limitation of Patrick just changing the name of the customer. He could change the entire object.
Right.
So instead of saying, oh, this is a customer object, he could say, oh, no, this is a Windows operating system command object, and I would like you to run a command.
Or here's the bank account for the refund for the customer object.
Yeah, this is a do some evil object.
Exactly. So in this particular exploit, what happened is they're deserializing these objects, and because they accept multiple objects, they have no idea which object it is. So they deserialize it generically. Just say, oh, whatever this object is, deserialize it, and then we'll figure out what it is. And in the initialization constructor of the object is a go run this system command and get access to the system.
Okay, wait a minute now. You can't serialize code. You can only serialize data and deserialize data, but if it matches some code that exists on the system that it's deserialized to, that's what runs.
Right, exactly. So if I had an object, let's say, that had access to system.io of some sort.
Okay, sure.
And then I serialized the data for a system.io object, sent it along. When you rematerialized it, it would run whatever would be potentially in that constructor. So I could say, okay, well, the system.io object takes a command, a system command like dir or who am I or whatever, right? So if I put that property, if I put that property in there, that's just a string, right? When you reserialize the execution, the object, you're going to go, okay, cool. Well, this is a serial.io object. Well, there should be a string in here that's the dot command to run. Oh, yeah, there is a string, right? And that's just data. And it goes and runs it. So it's an interesting style of attack because if you know how all of the objects work, if you have a generic deserialization like this, you can call pretty much any shell object or what.
I'm still confused. As a developer, I would need to know, my system would need to know when it deserializes it that I'm expecting this object, and it looks safe to me, so I'm going to execute that. Well, I understand constructors and default constructors, but you would already have to have that code on your side, the good guy side.
Yes.
So how does that code get there?
So it depends on the application itself. So it's this type of deserialization attack. For example, in this particular case, the software, the Fortinet software, has the ability to interact with the system. It already understands these types of objects.
They're living off the land.
Okay, so it's got an object.
Right,
it's got a class within its whatever that has this code in there. And you've basically just changed the data that it's using in the constructor, which happens when it runs.
Exactly.
Which brings up an interesting thing. We've looked at software solutions for many years. One of the things that we do is we'll take an application and like look at it in a very like pen test against a web application. Yeah.
Reverse
and we find
engineering
that
way.
Surface area is a problem. If you have functions and objects that do things that you're not using, they shouldn't be there because the hackers will figure out a use for them that you didn't anticipate. And so you need to limit the surface area of your code to just the facts, ma'am, just the things that you need. And this is an example of why that needs to happen. We're talking about very sophisticated attacks. We're not talking about script kiddies coming in for a lot of these things until somebody else writes proof of concept. But when we talk about higher up the food chain, higher up the threat pyramid, this is where the rubber really meets the road. And if you don't want to be a supply chain attack, which is what this would be, because if I'm running Fortinac and you exploit my system, your Fortinac's the reason I got owned. We need to start thinking more about security in the developer side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree. And the deserialization, like I said, this is a really neat attack. I just posted in our chat here, which might be good to go with the show links if we can. It actually shows examples of how this works. Like, there's a Python example in here that shows how a pickled object that was just taking an auth token can be manipulated to run Python subprocesses. That's one of the examples in here, which is really kind of cool. Another one is...
I'm going to add this to the show notes.
Java deserialization, which is deserializing a file from the file system to put some type of structure into a Java swing button. And that also has a deserialization attack that you can then run commands.
Sure, just throw out Java swing button and everybody will follow along. First of all, there's only one Java programmer left in the world, and he works at this big corporation with a giant lead door that doesn't have a sign on the outside. And Swing is a UI user interface framework for Java. So believe it or not, kids, Java used to be a browser technology where you could write UI code, and then the whole promise was that you could write code that runs on Windows and on Mac. And so Swing was the user interface element for that. The user interface language, I suppose you could say. But anyway, so a swing button, a Java swing button, therefore, is a button in a standalone application that can run on Windows or Mac desktops. And why would you do that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Go ask your father.
Yeah. Now that's
convenience. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Except it works. Hey, did I say that out loud? Okay. All right. So this was a very educational hack, which I think is great. We need to do that from time to time, but it has been patched. Yeah. So it's not really something you have to worry about anymore if you're patching. Okay. So where should we go next? Should we do this CVE 2023-2986 abandoned cart light?
Yeah, I think so. And we don't have to put too much time into this. So critical authentication bypass vulnerability found in the WooCommerce WordPress plugin. Surprise, surprise. WordPress plugins are the way to get into WordPress applications. This is if you're running the WooCommerce plugin that is 5.14.2 or less, go patch. Risk here is someone could get administrative access to your WordPress site. So you don't want that.
Okay. So it's an old story, but patch it up.
100%.
And I don't know. You think we should be steering people away from WordPress as a platform? It's not a bad platform. It's just the plugins can.
Yeah. Honestly, it's not a bad platform at all. There are plenty of times. One of the organizations that we pen test, HyperSecure, and they have a WordPress site, and we have yet to get access to it. If you use strong passwords on your administrative accounts on WordPress, you have a web application firewall in front, making sure people aren't brute forcing, and you make sure that the plugins that you use are only the necessary ones and are up to date.
Yeah.
Chances are you're not going to get hacked.
Yeah.
Better yet, don't have any plugins if you can. And I don't know how you break into that website. So,
yeah, right. Okay, let's talk about VMware's ARIA operations networks. There's a critical vulnerability here, and first thing is, has it been patched?
Absolutely, sir. So, if you're staying up on VMware as of late, VMware's gotten a lot of news over the last 6 months. There have been several pretty important exploits on VMware. This one's for ARIA, but there have been some ESXi exploits that give remote code execution, etc. Just keep an eye. It seems like the hacker community is really starting to focus on hypervisors. So ESX, Hyper-V, etc. Just make sure they're always patched. I'll give you a little story here. And I don't remember whether we had mentioned this before or not, but we were on a pen test, and we were able to exploit the hypervisor of a particular server, and found out how they were backing up VMs. And we used that same account to then back up an entire VM to our computers, and we pulled the domain controller over. And at that point, it's now offline. So we were able to crack all the passwords for the domain, etc. They never saw the attack because they were watching the live running systems. And if you pull the system over to your house and then disconnect, well, I can do anything I want with that system. So just be careful with your hypervisors, because they do get kind of access to the keys to the kingdom. Yeah.
If that had been done by an enemy actor, that would be called a breach.
Oh, yeah. You'd have all the data, and you'd never know what they got, really. Because it would just look like a backup sub process backed up the VMs, which is what happens every night anyways. So yeah, just be careful.
All right. And that brings us to our clickbait of the week here. Update now. Apple fixes 3 actively exploited vulnerabilities. But I would posit that unlike previous clickbait stories that we have waited until the last story to talk about, this one's actually pretty scary.
Yeah. I actually really, I don't know why, but I really enjoy it when Apple gets hacked. I think...
Oh, me too. They spent so many years being so pretentious with the black turtlenecks and
the glass,
waving their fingers in our faces. We don't get hacked. We don't have bugs.
Yeah, and it's, listen, I know the three of us are Windows fanboys. We've been in that ecosystem for 30 years, so...
Which is painful enough without somebody waving their finger in our face.
Right. So, these are, and it's an interesting group of hacks. So for those of you, who have an Apple device, go patch it. There's
and some of this is really old hardware.
Some of it is.
One of these is like iPhone 7, things like that. Yep. Some of them are newer.
Yeah, Mac OS Big Sur.
Well, Mac OS Monterey.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Your Apple Watch Series 4s and
That's
later.
The latest.
So there's several out there. Like, a lot of people don't think about patching their watch. Like, go out and patch your watch. Go out and patch your Mac OS if you have one. Go out and patch your phone if you have one. Just let it do its thing. Some of these are pretty interesting exploits, though.
Yeah, let's get into some of the interesting
ones. The one
I
really want to focus on
is a bunch.
CVE 2023 32434. A vulnerability in the kernel due to an integer overflow. So, integer overflow. Integers can only...
I can explain that.
Please do.
So an integer is a number that is either positive or negative, and it is represented typically by 4 bytes together, or a 32-bit number, right? In binary. And so if you have 4 bytes in an integer and you're in a non-managed software system, such as something that was written in C or assembly language, or even C++, if you get the address of that integer And instead of writing just 4 bytes to it, you write umpteen bytes, or
some number higher than 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, some number, exactly, some number higher than 4 bytes. That's called an overflow because you're writing into somebody else's memory space. You're in their bathtub, man. Get out.
Right, exactly. So that's it. So this is a kernel vulnerability. So the lowest level process you possibly can have on a system. There's an integer overflow. So that already sounds really bad. So successful exploitation of this would enable an attacker to execute arbitrary code, so any code they want, with kernel privileges. So highest level privileges,
that's crazy.
Run any code you want just by exploiting this. Apple is aware of this report, reported issue, and it's been actively exploited. So there's actually a threat actor out there actively exploiting this. Since release of iOS 15.7, this vulnerability was also part of an operation called Operation Triangulation.
I know what that was. We talked about this. This is when Russia said that the U.S. hacked thousands of iPhones in an iOS zero-click attack, meaning that you could send a message to an iPhone, and they didn't even have to read it.
So good.
Oh, my God.
Your tax dollars at work.
I know. This is where Patrick says, like, wow, I think we're one of the best out there. I think you're probably,
we are.
You're absolutely right.
We are.
Like, it's an impressive hack where, the NSA is like, we'll just, run any code we want on an iPhone, with 0 clicks, no interaction.
There are parts of the government where the superpower is to seem incompetent, but be super competent below the scenes.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's impressive. No. So go patch. Yeah, go patch. This is an important one.
Yeah,
but I think it's very cool to see these types of bugs because the amount of effort, being a person who writes exploits for a living, the amount of effort that goes into writing something and researching something like this is enormous. It's not hours, it's not days, it's not weeks, it's usually months, if not a year worth of time in research.
If a hacker, if an evil hacker found an exploit like that, they could make $10 million selling it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because to use it as a targeted attack would be huge if they were like, oh, well, I know that this particular world leader uses an iPhone. That's one thing. And you can get access to their device at an administrative level. But then, imagine just mass sending this out to, I don't know, 1 billion people. You could brick 1 billion iPhones if you wanted to. Like it's a pretty impressive digital nuke, if you will.
It's devastating. Yeah.
So kids, stop wasting your time learning games and be a hacker, and you can make $10 million.
Well, and you also go to jail or be executed.
You go to jail.
Or go work at the NSA.
That's right.
Right. That's true. Because they love hiring hackers, don't they?
Mm-hmm. They do.
That's the rumor.
One thing that I want to mention before we go is that, do you remember the Best Practices in Security for Developers show that we did?
Yeah. That was great.
Just a couple weeks ago for Dev Express. Well, that video is out. And if you go to Security Best Practices for Developers episode 94, the only link in that show is the link to the YouTube video.
And then you'll get to see our mugs.
And so we did a video of it. Yeah, you get to see what it looks like when we actually talk to each other.
I was wearing my Live American, Die American shirt, I think.
Yes, you were.
I was on vacation in the Smoky Mountains. So
that's right. Or were you in hiding?
I was in hiding. Deep hiding. That's actually a bunker. That's why there's no windows.
All right, guys. With that, we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.